So this week on the Mindful Dad podcast, I had my first ever guest, and it was my 13-year-old son. I had no idea this would be happening, by the way. I was like, hey, I'm about to record, so be quiet. And he's like, can I record with you? And I'm like, you know what? Let's do that. I have him for his spring break this week, and I'm like, you know what? Let's record together. And this video is going to be me speaking about 5 truths that you would say 5 gems that I've learned from this conversation with my 13-year-old as it pertains to fatherhood, as it pertains to son and dad relationships. But, if you have daughters, the same can be true. And I just wanted to come on YouTube and just give a quick synopsis of that podcast episode. The full episode will be in the description. So if you want a full deep dive on the podcast, you can listen to the Mindful Dad podcast. So here are 5, surprisingly, but appreciative. I'm very appreciative of these gems that came up in conversation with my 13-year-old Kaleb. I took some notes, by the way. So the first one is, and I always believed this, but he asked me a question that really confirmed it. And that is, fatherhood is spiritual. And the reason why I say fatherhood is spiritual, prior to telling you the question he asked me, the effect that we have on our children when we interact with them is not just surface level, right? It goes layers upon layers upon layers. So for example, he asked me this question. So we were taking turns asking each other questions, and he said, how do you tap into your kindness every day, even with all you've been through, right? And folks who know me on this channel, I share my adversity in fatherhood as well. 3-year custody battle, spent over $80,000. That's what made me become a mindful fatherhood coach, right? That crisis led me to wanting to help other people who felt alone and want to embrace emotions more in the role of dad. And anyway, so he asked me, he said, what I want to know is, how do you show up this way even after all you've been through? How do you show up so kind? Not only to him and my daughter, but how do I show up this way to the average human being despite all I've been through? And, I answered him and I said, you know why? First of all, we're all uniquely perfect, but I'm flawed to some sense. We all, right? So I said, but you know why I show up that way? And I prefaced that with saying that I'm not saying this is like 100% of the times, but I said I show up that way because I view everybody as God. I view everybody as source, as a co-creator, an extension of just the divine. I really do. And like I said before, sometimes I'm human. I may fall into the traps, but whether it be my son, my daughter, my parents, my nephew, a random person in the grocery store, a random person I come across on a hike, a coworker, whoever it may be, I always view them as they are the divine, because spiritually I have conviction that everyone is. So if you're going to view people like that, you're going to want to treat them with gentleness, kindness, compassion. You're going to want to give them empathy. You're not going to want to disrespect people. You're going to want to listen to them, give them eye contact when they're talking. You're going to want to allow them to show up how they need to show up unconditionally. And that's what I said on the podcast. I said, you know what, man? I said, whatever I'm going through does not stop me from looking at everybody as if they are divine. So when I look at people, I have this thing on my lock screen, and it's like 5 practices how I want to live throughout the day. 5 ways I want to show up. And one of them is, no matter who it is, when I'm interacting with someone, see the light in them, honor the light in them and in myself. But it's important to honor the light in them. And, I'm able to do that with the person up the street, and I'm able to do that with my kids. So sometimes, I'm human. Like, I may snap at my children when I'm having a rough day, but I think I'm figuring it out as I go, right? I think for the most part, I'm actually pretty good. Like, I may not show up 10 out of 10, but I think 6, 7 out of 10 times, if I'm able to not react and not snap, because I'm able to see that this is not just son, this is not just daughter, this is divine presence in front of me, right? I'm able to treat these experiences a lot differently. I'm able to respond a lot differently as a father than I might have had years back before I was undertaking this journey. So that's number 1. Fatherhood is spiritual. All right. The second thing I realized was, kids don't want perfect dads. They want honest ones. And I bring this up because he mentioned something to me that he actually appreciates when I apologize. And the very first episode on my podcast was about we need to be okay with being vulnerable. We need to be okay with just letting down the tough guy guard. We have to be okay with being vulnerable in fatherhood, and we need to stop looking at that as a weakness. I'm 37, my son is 13, my daughter is 3. I didn't start apologizing in fatherhood until I was about 35, 2 years now. So, I say all this to say, like, this is not something that I'm on here like, oh, I'm a guru, like it took me a long time to be able to embody how I truly want to show up, because, I was showing up how I was taught to show up, by my dad, his dad, my friend's dad, the dads on the social media, like, how it goes, right? We're just creatures of habit. So until we make the unconscious conscious, we're not going to know the difference. So when he said that, it really made me realize that, he doesn't want like a perfect dad. He just wants an honest one. And we had this conversation and he told me like, yeah, I really appreciate, when you apologize. And I know that he appreciates it. You know why? Because sometimes we'll get into a little spat and he'll be the first one to apologize. He's 13. I think that's huge for a 13-year-old to sit back, reflect, and say, you know what, Dad, I apologize for my part in that. And it's because he sees me apologizing. And not just to him, he's seen me apologize to numerous people for whatever the case may be. But so I think being vulnerable, our kids are going to actually appreciate that. They're not just going to look at you as some weakling. This is coming from a 13-year-old boy who is growing by the day, it seems like. And he appreciates his dad being vulnerable. So that's the second thing. The third thing was, your child's resistance is your reflection. So I kind of spoke about this last episode when it comes to shadow work and fatherhood, but we were on the podcast and he was saying how, he was disliking the fact that I was forcing him to journal. And, I thought it was funny because I knew that. But we always want to project our healing onto our kids. We always want to project, the things that we think they would like, because he was literally right there. But anyway, we always want to project the things that we and think, oh, you're going to like this too, or you should do this too. This worked for me. You should do this too. And what that does is takes away from their own individual journey. You know what I mean? So I think him basically saying like, listen, I don't like journaling. It doesn't make me feel good. And I know I'm just doing it because you're forcing me to do it. He's 13. I didn't start journaling until I was 30. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying it's bad to introduce things to your children, right? Because I introduced the sport of basketball to him and he works extremely hard at that. I've introduced sitting down and really hours at a time getting lost in a story. He's one of the biggest readers I know, So certain things will resonate and some won't. So just because I've found out, oh my God, journaling is eye-opening for me in my adult life, I don't have to project my healing onto him. He has his own journey. Maybe when he's 20, he'll pick up journaling. Who knows? So, their resistance to things is often just a mirror of our reflections, So that's something I wanted to say. The fourth one is empathy is a muscle and kids notice when you use it. So he said, Dad, I really appreciate about you is that you empathize with me a lot, not just sympathize. And he said, a lot of people don't know the difference between the two. And so he went on to say how we know what empathy versus sympathy is, but it was cool to hear him say, I like how when I may get in trouble or I may be going through adversity, I like how you empathize with me instead of sympathize. He said, I like how you put yourself in my shoes because you've been there as a child, as a teenager, you've been there. And he really appreciated that. So like I said, empathy is a muscle, right? It takes practice to embody these type of characteristics, what I will call virtues. In the Gita, empathy is one of the 26 virtues to be what they call godlike. I really take that to heart, and he basically said, I really, really, really appreciate that about you when you empathize with me and not just sympathize. So they notice stuff like that. We don't think like they know. I would have never thought he would have said that, but they notice stuff like that. And the last one is they truly value presence. They truly do value presence. You don't have to be, like I said, perfect. They just value you being there. And this came up in the conversation because he was saying how whenever he sees me at his basketball games, it gives him a boost in confidence. And sometimes when he's at a game, and let's say I'm late, and he looks over, he doesn't see me, he like feels a certain type of way. And he goes, when I look over and when I see you, I feel really confident. And I'm like, that's amazing. So, I try to show up before tip off. Due to logistics, I'm usually coming from like an hour and a half away for his games when he's not with me. So, I try my hardest to go there before tip off, but sometimes I may get there a few minutes late. But the point of it is my presence is really, 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 truly appreciated by him. And I just think that's amazing, because he said, I might not even show it a lot, but I really appreciate you showing up for me. I really appreciate you showing up to every game. I really appreciate you showing up for me. So yeah, we're going to leave on that note. So we are going to leave on that note. And I just really want to give a gratitude for everyone who taps into my YouTube channel. I'm just starting this off. I think this message is so important for fathers, and I'll be better week by week with this. I'll be more consistent. I'll be better on the camera. And I just hope that whoever comes across this message, that it was of some added value. All my links, all my resources will be in the description. Until next week.